Deborah Davis, born in a place called LaGrange, Illinois. It's fairly near Chicago. I was born in 1968.
I'm Jennifer Lesney Fleming. I was born in Berea, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland, on July 18th, 1968, so I'm 48 years old.
My name's Kyle Fleming. I was born May 13th, 1966 in Indianapolis, Indiana, so I'm 50 years old.
Okay, perfect.
And I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm 73 years old.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm Gary Lesney. I'm 77 years old. I was born in Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
It's a kind of a vague concept because it's not an actual war. It's not a physical war, so we didn't really understand it. What I mostly understood was that the Russians were bad. And, that's how we felt as kids growing up. Okay, the Russians are the bad guys, and they want to destroy us, and they want to bomb us.
My understanding of the Cold War was that it was a time where there were just very serious tensions between primarily the U.S. and Russia, and both sides were very suspicious of each other, and both sides during that time amassed a lot of weapons, particularly nuclear weapons, that really threatened the entire world.
I just remember the Cold War being like this complete dispute or battle, but it was like about everything. Like, it wasn't just like military, it was what economics, what kind of laws to have, police, whether police state or surveillance, what kind of freedoms you should have. So it was like this big, total, opposite extremes.
Well, it started out when we were I was about maybe 7 or 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was terrified all the time because from that time on, and all through high school, we had drills.
Okay.
Where we had to hide under our desks or go out into the hall and lean up against the wall, cover our head. So we always lived in fear that Russia was going to bomb us.
Yeah.
So it was terrifying for a child. There'd be always something going on. There was always something to worry about. Khrushchev was probably the most terrifying. His head, and they kept saying, "We are going to bury you. We are going to bury you."
My parents probably explained some of it, but I don't recall that specifically. Most of what I learned would have been through our classes, in school. So I guess that was informing myself through our government classes, and especially remembering my junior and senior years.
When I was a teenager, I don't know if my parents and I spoke a lot about the Cold War, but every night we would watch the news and took a lot of classes and read a lot of books about the Cold War. Definitely that was a really big theme as far as American history, recent American history is concerned.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't recall my parents saying much about it, or if they did, I don't remember it. Yeah, I wasn't listening. I was interested in it, so I read a lot, and then when I went to college, I studied economics, and one of the things we focused on was like comparative economics between, the central planning style of communist countries and of the Soviet Union.
So having then strong Ronald Reagan come in and build up our military, and he had lots of not just strong policies, but he had a way of speaking probably because he had been an actor. Even as a kid, you knew, you just felt safe with this president because he was such a good leader.
I think that your perspective on Ronald Reagan and his impact on the Cold War will probably be influenced by whether you are a Democrat or Republican. Ronald Reagan was a Republican, and my perspective as a Democrat and somebody who's done a lot of research on the Cold War, I do think that Reagan certainly was more open to reestablishing relations, I think, ultimately with Russia. But I honestly think that Gorbachev was really the leader there. He was the one that was ultimately very progressive and was open to the idea of changing ways in Russia and establishing a better relationship.
My view of like Western leaders in the 70s was that they were very weak towards the Soviet Union, and I don't know, didn't really respond strongly. And I don't mean militarily strongly, but just strongly against them. Mm-hmm. And I think that my view of the election of Reagan and Margaret Thatcher around the same time, that the West took on a stronger position against the Soviet Union and was tougher on them. And because it was a cultural battle too, it was that they really put the pressure on the Soviet system.
When Reagan came in to power, there was some relief when the Berlin Wall came down, and it seemed for a time that Russia was willing to work with us, and it didn't seem to last very long.
Okay.
That good feeling. I mean, especially now.
I didn't understand all of what what the Soviets' position was, because of course, just like for you, although you have more access to different news than I did, but you only hear what you're told in the news, right? You only know what you're told in the news. So who the Soviets are and what they're doing is one-sided.
Yeah.
Right. And I just knew that for us, I mean, communism was really the opposite of democracy, and we didn't want that here, and we didn't want them to begin to take over just as Hitler had done. I think always the feeling was, okay, we as the superpower needed to be strong and be sure that what the Soviets were doing was not going to allow continued takeover.
Probably a hard question to answer, really, because I even think even today our news and so forth is so slanted. We have, I think, a very difficult relationship with Russia or the Soviet Union, and I think we always have. I think both sides are very suspicious of each other, and tensions have always run high. There was so much in the news about it. There were so many tensions that I think it really became this view that Russia was somehow evil. They were this evil country, and obviously it's, much deeper than that. I mean, that's just a very surface kind of statement. Yeah. But I think that in America, you did get this view because of the way news was covered and so forth, that really Russia was this evil nation.
And I think it changed over time. I mean, the Soviets had, in my view, a system that was never going to work. I mean, the whole idea that you could plan everything, 5 guys in a room could plan everything in your country. Yeah. I just didn't see how that was ever going to, in the long run, be successful. Mm-hmm. And then eventually that slowed down and stopped. And then they had to switch to trying to make their system work. And I think over time you saw that they tried different things to either make their system work or to divert your attention from the fact that it wasn't working. And then I think by the time you got people like Gorbachev taking over in the Soviet Union, I think even they started to realize that their system just wasn't sustainable.
Well, I think we felt that they just wanted to take over the whole world.
Yeah, they were always the enemy.
I think, as we were growing up, the worst thing you could be was the communist. Well, then came the threat from Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
With the overthrow of the government there, but then, of course, the Soviets moved right in there and became friends with Castro.
Mm-hmm.
And they started arming Cuba with nuclear missiles directed right at Cleveland and New York, the missiles.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that.
They
Yeah.
had missile sites right down the street from where we lived.
Yeah.
I was in the Army, by the way, and I was in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So when they first detected the missiles in Cuba, they got it from a satellite picture.
Okay.
Then they flyovers with these U-2 planes, one of which was shot down in Russia.
No one really knows what happened to who was responsible for Kennedy's death, because there's always this conspiracy theory that it was actually the Russians
Mm-hmm.
that hired him to do that. So no one really knows for sure.
Definitely. But it wasn't very often. It wasn't all the time. Like when my mom was growing up, they would all, go for cover and get under tables. I didn't feel the threat very much.
I would say for the most part, I felt safe. Although I would say that there were a lot of movies and a lot of things that you could find about what would happen if there was a huge nuclear war. And so, for example, in 1983, I was a sophomore in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and there was this movie that came out called The Day After.
Yeah.
And what it talked about was this, it painted the scenario of a huge nuclear war between Russia and the United States. And it was terrifying, and it talked about how after this nuclear war, there'd be like nothing left, and, people would be, dying because of cancer, because of the radiation, and that's the kind of stuff we heard about all the time as kids, as teenagers primarily. And it really was scary because you felt powerless. I mean, we can't control some crazy leader. If there's somebody in another country that wants to start some nuclear war, then the belief was, well, then the U.S. would retaliate, and then, the world could be over. And we always just heard this stuff, and it was frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did, but I don't recall ever thinking that there was there was like some kind of nuclear war that was imminent.
Okay.
That was going to happen like tomorrow or any time very soon.
Yeah.
I guess maybe because I saw that since the end of World War II, there had been obviously, we had been involved in a war in Korea, a war in Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and neither of those wars had turned into nuclear wars.
Okay.
Well, I think now we have a better understanding. I'm still worried about Russia and what it can do,
Mm-hmm.
but I think they have more to lose
Okay.
than they ever did before. I don't see Russia trying to take over the world. They might be trying to take over a lot of the prior Russian territory that they had
Mm-hmm.
in the Soviet Union countries, but I just don't think that's going to happen anymore.
It was West and East and West Germany, and it was really two parts, and it was like, oh neat, you can go visit West Germany, and you can see all these neat towns, and then East Germany was again communism. And most of what you learn too growing up is going to be tainted by Hitler. So it was that association was made us have a very negative feeling about Germany.
During that time period, we were closely aligned with our allies, with Germany. My sense is that, Germany had the same concern that America did with respect to Russia, and, possible nuclear war and so forth. So I felt like we were closely aligned, in particular with respect to Berlin as well. And wanting to make sure that the Berlin Wall fell and that there was reunification and things like that. So I felt that we were aligned.
I guess my view was that we were all pretty much on the same page. Certainly the main allies. I mean, the Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan. I mean, those kind of allies. I guess I just viewed us all as having the same view towards the Soviet Union, with like NATO and stuff like that. I mean, a very common, unified approach. I remember recognizing that even though I didn't think there was a nuclear war that was likely, I definitely remember thinking that countries like, Germany and some of those others that there could be a regular war.
That I know of, it didn't affect my daily life, but that's because I was a teenager. So it was interesting because when you felt it the most was during the Olympics, and you'd have these amazing gymnasts, and you'd think, gosh, these few lucky people, who get to break through and do something instead of being oppressed.
I don't think the Cold War really affected my daily life, except for just giving me a general sense of unease, as I talked about earlier with respect to the concern that boy, there could at one day be a nuclear war. That if our leaders aren't smart about things, that some kind of dispute could escalate and the world could be forever changed. So you always had that general fear.
Another thing that happened during that time frame is people were building shelters in their backyards, stocking them with food and water. I don't know how long they were expected to survive in there.
Yeah, but everybody at work was talking about it. We came home.
Sure.
And then at that time, things were televised, and they kept breaking in, the news.
Yeah, I think that's the scary part, yes, but not the specifics of the history. People can be power hungry, and when they are, and people tend to be, then they're just going to keep taking that power. They become dangerous because they just seek more and more of it. We're at risk for being too dominant, sure, and I think that's true of any country. So we do have to be careful about history repeating itself.
Absolutely, I do think history could repeat itself. I think that in the world, the U.S. made a lot of strides in becoming a more welcome and kind country. And I think, unfortunately, with the election of now President Trump, things are changing. I think that he is very reactionary, which is a very dangerous thing in politics. I think he likes to say things that are controversial to get people's reaction and maybe to try to find support among his followers. But saying something or tweeting something without a lot of thought behind it is very, very dangerous. It can quickly escalate into a situation that we don't want to be in. And so, yes, I think all Americans, or at least more than half of Americans in the U.S., are very, very frightened about Trump as a president and what that might mean for global relations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the scary thing is history repeats itself, but just different enough that you don't notice it. You know, the next crazy warmongering tyrant is not going to look like the last one. He's going to look different.
Yeah.
And because the underlying things, I mean, you know, people's economic fears, their fear of what's happening to their jobs, their future, their kids' future, those things, you know, come back all the time.
Yeah.
And when people are afraid of what's happening to them or what their future holds, then they're susceptible. And I think that stuff can happen, you know, like, you know, super quick.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. We have absolutely no confidence in him at all. He wants to surround himself with people that adore him. And he's constantly patting himself on the back.
Again, seeing those kinds of movies like The Day After and things like that, and it just, when you're that young and you learn about how potentially fragile our world is, and that there's these weapons out there that can, you know, obliterate, you know, the land and all the people on it. I mean, that stays with you, and that certainly creates a fear that I don't think ever leaves.
I visited West Germany when I was in middle school, so I think like 1979. And I remember we were on like a bus and we went to like a checkpoint from East to West Germany. And of course there were like, you know, gates across the road and soldiers all over. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking that seemed really scary. It definitely made it more real to me to see it.
Okay.
I think the worst day of my life was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's when Kennedy was president. And actually, in books that I've read since that time, like biographies of him, he thought for sure that we would be annihilated by the Cuban missiles. And he already had a plan. He was not going to go into underground shelter. He was just going to go out on the front lawn of the White House.
Okay. And
die there. And he had put his wife and children in that underground bunker that they have. And she was refusing to go. She wanted to die with him. So I think we had reason to believe we were going to all die that day. It was pretty scary.
I think so, probably, because we have had more troops and more everything, more army.
Well, yeah, we were a superpower, so I think we felt that. I think we felt more that in a protectionist mode.
Okay.
You know, we were like everyone's mother. I mean, we want everybody to be a democracy, and we're going to take care of them.
We weren't threatening anyone. That's the main
that we know of.
that we know of.
From our point of view, we didn't see it that way.
Yeah.